the going from one act to another in a play. So when the Old Testament closes, the curtains are drawn, and then God rearranges the stage, and then 400 years later, the curtains are drawn back, and there's a whole new set for Act 2 of the play. And so what we're looking at is the time in between and what happened and how God moved in amazing ways. There's no scriptural speaking to it, but history speaks to it. And the reason we're doing this, and I kind of said it last week, and then we didn't get to a point for me to say it again last week in the notes, but clearly God is moving and acting and getting things ready, so we're looking at that. And it also helps to do what a lot of people say you can't do, and that's connect this book with a history book. Because a lot of people that they're not Christians or even are Christians that don't have a good understanding, they say, well, you know, history's history and you need to study it, and this stuff really happened, and what's in the Bible, you know, it's some good stuff, but I don't know. But it's connected, and there's connections all through, even in the 400 years that it's not actually spoken to. There's stuff that happens right before that you see the connectors to in history. So that book, the Bible, goes very well right along with the history book. There is no contradictions. They work together perfectly. Plus, think about what God did. Yes?
Did you hear this last week? They found some more, an original copy of Matthew.
I didn't know that. Well, that's not going to make the news.
Well, of course it didn't, and here's why. Because it was found.
Go ahead.
It was found in the wrappings of a mummy. Because they would use whatever papyrus they had left or whatever, and they dated it exactly to 60 AD. Wow. So this is it's the earliest known copy of Matthew, and it was fairly interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I'm sure it'll match up exactly with the Matthew we have today. Not a doubt in my mind. So another thing, besides the fact that it shows how history connected with the Bible and how it all flows together, is that God is doing some amazing things to get ready for Jesus and then what Jesus is going to do. Think about the whole world goes from Eastern to Western during this time period. And what does that mean? Well, the Greeks and then the Romans create a road system. They take over the known world, so everybody speaks Greek. So when Jesus hits the scene, everybody in the known world is speaking the same language. When the disciples are ready to go out and spread the word about Jesus, they use the road system that the Greeks and the Romans built, and they use the language, and they're able to communicate. If Jesus had come earlier, the message wouldn't have been able to spread. Obviously, God could do it, but God set it up so that the message would be able to be spread very quickly and easily and efficiently. And the Greeks and then again the Romans built all kinds of cities, and it makes it easy to spread the word. So God clearly knows what He's doing. All we have to do is just study it and look at it and go, wow, look at that. God is doing amazing things. And another thing, real quick, just because I couldn't finish it last week because of time, but we looked at a couple different battles, and Mary said, going through the battles, but they're interesting to me. But just take the Battle of Marathon, for example. Think about, most of you didn't think about it because your teacher didn't point it out to you, but if the Greeks lose that battle, then the world is totally different. I mean, the world is dominated by the East. Basically, the Persian Empire is Iran, basically, the descendants of the people in Iran today. So Iran would have dominated the world for the rest of history, but the Greeks win. So the Greeks, and then gave way to the Romans. That's all of Western civilization. I mean, the Western way of thinking, democracy, the way we are in the United States and in Europe, it's all from Greece. If they lose that battle or any of the subsequent ones, then Iran, this part of the world, dominates, and there's no Western culture today. It's not the same. And so God was in all of that as well. You know, well, was God moving with Alexander the Great? Of course He is, because Alexander needs to do that in order to get the world westernized and to get the world ready for the message that Jesus is in. And the story I'm going to tell you is going to illustrate that too, I think, in a pretty good way. So we left off actually, go ahead, right here, where Alexander, by the way, he was tutored by Aristotle, if you don't remember that from history class, which is kind of a cool connection there. So until he was 16, Alexander learned from Aristotle. I mean, you know, talking about having good teachers. Well, who's your teacher? And so, who's your teacher? Aristotle. Oh, okay, never mind. So he He was under Aristotle until 16. He takes over when he's 19, by the way. His father's killed when he's 19, and he takes over. And so he marches, decides to go after the Persians. He gets to Jerusalem. The slide right before this, for those of you that weren't here, was as Alexander's army is approaching the Holy Land, the Jews and the Samaritans switch sides. They very wisely tell the Persians, see ya, and they decide to go over to Alexander's side. And so Alexander is approaching Jerusalem. And so the story goes. This is recorded by Josephus a little bit later, not an eyewitness account, but I believe it to be true, at least the essence of the story basically true. But the story goes that the high priest at the time gets all the priests and the leaders of Jerusalem, and they go out to meet Alexander, dressed in their priestly robes and that kind of stuff. And Alexander sees them coming, and he rides ahead of his army to meet them, and salutes them, greets them by him paying them honor, and then they respond and honor Alexander. One of Alexander's generals then rides up and says, why did you salute them? You're the king of the universe basically now, and they should be saluting you. And Alexander then tells a story about when he was back in Greece, he had a dream. That he was wondering if he was supposed to go and attack the Persians or not. And in that dream, a guy, then he says, this guy, so the priest appeared to Alexander in a dream, told me to go ahead and do it, that the Persians would fall to you. And so he woke from the dream and decided that a God, he didn't know it was the God, had told him that it was okay. And so he recognized the guy and then acknowledges that. The next day, they take him into Jerusalem, and he goes and sacrifices with the priest's guidance to our God, to the one true God, and acknowledges that it's divine intervention that has him defeating the Persians. Then they show him Daniel. And if I didn't say this last week, much of Daniel's prophecy some 200 years earlier, it's about Alexander, it's about the Greeks. And so it's coming true. And so the high priest, they read Daniel to Alexander, and he goes, yeah, that's me, I'm doing that. And so that's further confirmation to Alexander that the God of the Jews, at least, is with him. And so he gives them all kinds of favors. Like, he doesn't make Jerusalem and the Jews submit quite as much as everyone else. He still takes them over. I mean, he doesn't militarily defeat them. They don't fight. But when he comes in, he usually imposes all kinds of rules and regulations and taxes and that kind of stuff. He doesn't do that. I mean, that's a historical fact. He doesn't do that to the Jews in Jerusalem. So that, again, to me, lends credence to the story that he really did have a dream and that he recognized the high priest. And why else would he not, institute on the Jews the same that he did to everyone else? He eventually then marches on down and defeats Egypt and builds the city of Alexandria. He's not prideful or anything like that, naming the city after himself. But Alexandria becomes a very important city. It's going to come back up in our notes later.
For people who weren't here last week, it's Alexander the Great. We haven't actually said that today.
Oh,
You
yes.
said it.
I think I did say Alexander the Great, but that's okay. It's Alexander the Great, one of the greatest conquerors of all times, which we need to go back to the map. Go ahead. All right, so then he starts the spread of the Greek system and Greek worldview. This is what God needs to happen, wants to happen, is the Greek system and the Greek government and the Greek worldview, which the Greek worldview is actually bad for, as you'll see, but Alexander is the one that starts that. Go. So that is Alexander's empire. If you were paying attention last week and just a few seconds ago on the map, it looks pretty much like the Persian Empire at their height. Alexander just basically takes them over. All of the Persians, the modern day Iranians took over, plus he controls Greece, which they were never able to. The battles we talked about last week is when they were trying to take over Greece and were defeated, which again is a huge pivotal moment in history that the Europeans won and then start their dominance. And so there's the world of Alexander the Great. Now, those of you that do actually know your history, does Alexander get to enjoy his empire very long?
No.
No, he dies very quickly. Go. But we're not getting to that yet. So let's talk just for a second about the Greek worldview. It's called Hellenism. This is when Jesus comes on the scene, Hellenism is dominant. Alexander starts it, and for the next 400 years it spreads all around, and it becomes dominant in the culture. He has to deal with Jews that have gone over to the Hellenist side, which we'll be looking at today and next Sunday as well. How many Jews even have succumbed to Hellenism. And as I give you the tenets of Hellenism, see if it doesn't sound a little familiar.
Well, so if somebody's a Hellenistic Jew, is that a good thing?
That's a bad thing. You're about to see. It's a very bad thing. And this is the day that RBL on our trip really nailed us. If you remember that story when we went up to the Greek city and we looked down at all the ruins and we all went nuts, and then he just hammered us. And I don't want to tell you that story. Maybe I'll get to it as we go through again. But let's look at what is Hellenism. What is the Greek? What is Alexander's idea? And then all those that come after Alexander, the Greeks, and then the Romans. What is their idea of the world? Go ahead. It's that man is the ultimate in reality. Good to hit them all four, actually. The mind is the basis of all truth. The body is the ultimate in wisdom. And pleasure is the ultimate goal of life. That's what Alexander believed. That's what the Greeks then come to believe. That's Hellenism in a nutshell. That everything centers around man. Whatever you want to do, you should do. Look at this. Pleasure is the ultimate goal in life. Now, I ask you to think about, does that stuff sound familiar? Does it? Sounds like the United States of America. Today sounds like the Western world today, and we shouldn't be shocked. We are the descendants of the Greeks and then the Romans and their system, and it's just gotten a lot worse, I think, not better. So you could certainly argue that those four things started way back in BC times, but are very prevalent in the westernized world today, the European world, the Americans included. So, question.
How did Alexander the Great die again? He was assassinated?
That's debatable. He does die very young, and some people speculate that he was poisoned, but no one can prove that. But if you watch History Channel all the time, there'll be a special about how he was poisoned or this or that and the other. It is strange that he dies in his late 20s, early 30s.
33, I thought.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, there is a lot of speculation that somebody poisoned him. But we don't know for sure. Nobody wrote on their deathbed, "I poisoned Alexander the Great." Okay, is everybody finished writing? Okay, so now the next slide is going to be, well, how did the Greeks spread this? You know, the Greek culture, the Greek system that I'm talking about, they definitely had a system in place. And again, this system, you see it when Jesus deals with the same thing. Everything, what Alexander creates, is the stage that Jesus has to deal with. Jesus has to deal with these things. And when Jesus goes into a Greek city, he has to deal with these. Go ahead and hit them all.
There one more.
Yeah. So the Greeks, and then when I say the Greeks and Romans, I mean obviously they're different people. Greece and Rome are different. But basically the Romans take over the Greeks, but they're so similar. They take the same gods, they just change the names. They're almost exactly the same. They take the theater, the gymnasium, the arena, the temple. They use all of those things. So you can almost interchange the Romans and the Greeks. Just know those Greeks first, then Rome. So they're not passive about this. The Greeks want to spread their ideas. They have a plan. They have a system to spread their ideas to the rest of the world. Alexander believes, and then his generals that follow him believe, that the way he's going to control this vast empire is to turn everybody into a Greek. And so you can't just I hope everybody becomes Greek. You have to have a systematic means of converting the rest of the world from Jew and Persian and Babylonian and Syrian, whoever you've taken over, turn them into Greeks. And he was very successful at it. And so the way they spread their worldview was the theater. Oh, and by the way, see if these don't sound familiar too.
This is sounding real scary.
Very. Yes. And so the way that they spread their the Hellenism is through controlling art and media. They controlled the theater. They controlled basically what today for us would be entertainment news. Is that they controlled it. The theater was not just entertainment. All the plays that went on, there was entertainment value, control the masses by entertaining them. But there was always a message, and the message was always the Greek worldview message. And so there wasn't just hey, let's do a random play to be funny. I mean, it might be a comedy, but it promoted the worldview that they wanted promoted. And there was no, other means of entertainment, so everybody went to the theater. Everybody went if you had the money. The gymnasium or the university, again, we think about basketball court, and they exercised a lot there, but that was where they educated. It was education system as well. You went and you did your exercise and you played sports and stuff there, but it was also, in the Greek world, gymnasium, you need to think just as much, if not more, about exercise as about learning. And so they controlled the education system and what people were taught and what people learned. They controlled sports, the arena, again, controlling the masses, getting them all together and entertaining them, and again, promoting the message that they wanted. And then they created temples. Most Greek and then Roman cities have a minimum of 2 temples, the patron god of that city, and then one more, usually, as I'm going to show you in just a second, a city that had 2. Again, most of them have at least 2. They have the biggie, and then they would have another one. If you didn't want to do Athena, basically, you could do Zeus or something like that. But they controlled, this is how they spread Hellenism. And wow, I mean, if the slide before is not us now, and then combined with this, whew, it's definite. We see it. We need to wake up and see it. Go ahead. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example, working in some pictures. Jerash is a place that we went on our first trip, not second. And so you haven't seen these pictures unless you've been in the class a super long time and on our first trip. But anyway, what I want to use Jerash is not just, hey, look at this, is to show you an example of all those things I just looked at. And how a Greek city was laid out. They all were built the exact same. Almost in the exact same spot in the city. Sometimes with slight modifications. So again, fast forward to Jesus. When Jesus enters Scythopolis, for example, or another Greek city, he's going to see exactly what I'm showing you now. I mean, they had a model, and they just replicated it everywhere they went. Okay? Now, the temple may change to who it's to, but basically, it's the same. All right, anybody remember the Decapolis? What is the Decapolis? We've studied it.
The 10.
Yeah, it's on the other, when Jesus says, let's go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Remember, that's the pagans. That's the Decapolis. So Jesus is hanging out on this side. Occasionally he comes to this side of the Sea of Galilee, but the cities you see in red are all Greek cities built by Alexander and then inhabited by the Romans. And then at the time of Jesus, they were they were Greek cities. The Jews didn't go there. I mean, non-Hellenized Jews, you wouldn't go. And so I showed you pictures of Scythopolis and of Hippos when we were talking about our Holy Land trip. It's spelled with a G. There's 2 different spellings, but this is the city that we're talking about. Gerasa is over in Jordan today. So just to give you an idea of where we are. So Jesus, no record that he ever went there, probably did not. It's a little too far over for him to go. He could have, it's just not recorded, but there's definitely no hint that he ever went there. But these other cities, again, they're exactly the same. So he would have seen something like that. That's the main gate getting into the city, and very ornate would have been have the ruler statue. In the Roman times, it would have been the Roman emperor and a statue of the patron god of the city in these little niches. So you're coming from the backwoods of Judea or out in the middle from anywhere out in the known world at the time, and you go to this Greek city. Boom. I mean, it doesn't look that magnificent maybe to you now, but picture it in its heyday. I mean, people are like, it's like somebody from the sticks going to New York City or Los Angeles or something like that going, oh, wow, it's the allure of that. That's what they want. This is the way to be. That's what they're saying to you. Come be modern and cool with us. Go. And then right inside the gate is the temple to Zeus, which is one of the main gods. And we're not going to study it. But if you want to jot that down, you can go. There's an account of Paul going into, I don't remember the exact city it is, but he goes in and they perform some miracles, and they start calling him, and is it Silas? Or it's one of his traveling partners, forgive me, I don't remember which one. But they go in, and the people of the city start trying to say he's Zeus. And it's an interesting story, but if you know what's happening, if you know the setting, of the world at the time, it makes perfect sense. I mean, the Zeus temple is right there. Paul does something right inside the city or right outside the city. They immediately start trying to say he's Zeus, and they talk about how the priest of Zeus comes out. It's because it's right there. I mean, it's right there in the city, right up inside the city gate. And so Paul has to say, hey, we're not gods. And anyway, but that story, that's the steps going up to what's left of the Zeus temple there in Jerash. Go.
Well, and they pray to Zeus and they give homage to him when they walk by and all that. So why wouldn't you think when somebody came doing incredible stuff? I mean, you would
Yep.
think, you know, our prayer, you know.
There's no shot of it with the scenic guard tower in the background. That's what it would have looked like at the time that we're talking about, and then at the time of Jesus and his disciples, it wouldn't have changed. A typical Greek city, Roman city, that's what the main temple would have looked like, the temple complex. So you were just looking at these steps leading up to the columns.
Can you back up? and go
Sure,
ahead
yeah,
again?
go, sure, back it.
Wrong
Wrong
way.
That's okay. One more back.
Yeah.
So what you're looking at, that's the bottom steps, and then there would have been some more steps, and then there's the temple itself.
So Lystra was one of the 10 cities?
I thought Lystra was up in Turkey.
Yeah, I think it's in, yeah, I don't think
I
so.
don't know.
Okay. Well, that's where Paul was when he,
When that happens?
Yeah.
But see, it's the city is laid out the same as Jerash.
oh, so it doesn't have to be one, okay.
No, it doesn't have to be
Okay.
one of the 10.
Okay.
All Greek and Roman cities, with minor exceptions,
Mhm.
are laid out almost exactly the same. So when Paul goes into Lystra, thank you, because I didn't remember, I didn't do my homework in preparing for a question that might be asked. The story takes place right outside the Zeus temple. And what I'm trying to get you to see is that matches up with archaeology. I mean, that's exactly the way every city was. You went right inside the gate. I mean, that's what they want. Think about it. What are they trying to do? Someone that doesn't live there, that comes in from the country, they see this magnificent gate, they walk in, and that's the second thing they see. And they're living in a little hut or in tents or something like that, and they're like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm going to be, these people got it. Okay? And so it's all part of the theater, so to speak. Go. All right, this is Hippodrome there in Jerash. It's where they did the races, the chariot races and stuff. And so it's still pretty much intact. You can see the bleachers there. I mean, you've seen Ben-Hur. I mean, you can picture, or Gladiator. I mean, you can picture it.
You can still see his tracks in the sand.
Wow, yeah, that's cool. So there you can see the whole thing. And so again, they controlled the population and manipulated population by putting on these big events. And you had the big arena there. They usually had an arena not as big as the Colosseum, obviously in Rome, but a separate one. This is just where the horse racing was and those kind of races. And then they had the other arena usually somewhere else in town. There is one of these, by the way, in Rome, a big one, but it doesn't get the press that. I mean, everybody in here has seen a picture of the Colosseum, but the Hippodrome in Rome is just a grassy field now with the hills on each side where the stands were. It's not as well preserved as this one, so you don't ever see it when people go to Rome or anything like that. Go. Every city had. There's the Zeus temple to give you an idea of how far you come in. So pretty close, front to the gate. They had the agoras, what they would call it at the time. The Romans called it the same thing, or the marketplace. And so you went in, and then you see, it's like going into the mall, like, wow, look at all the cool stuff. Go. So it's a big area, the colonnaded circle around the outside, just showing you splendor and power and all that kind of stuff. And then just picture tables and vendors and shops off behind it, like buildings that wouldn't be moved. And a lot of people in the middle would be just like set up shop, but then they would have actual buildings on the outer edge, like back here. Like that's like some of the buildings that would have been around where you were a nicer merchant, you had an established shop. Go. Different angle. But you kind of had the fountain in the center and all that kind of stuff. They know what they're doing. Go ahead. And then every Greek city, Roman city, has a bunch of roads, but they have the cardio and the decumus, the north-south road, the east-west road, and they intersected somewhere in the city. And they were straight. And so That was the two main roads that went from one gate to the other and went through the center of town. This is like Main Street, you know, wherever everything happens. And so every single one has a cardio and a decubus. Every single one. That Alexander builds and everyone else builds. And there you see one of them right there. I wish I could tell you, well, that's the north-south route. I don't remember which one that is, and it doesn't matter. Now, this is the same thing, except the inside. The road is actually here. And so then on the inside of the road, they had buildings and shops and all kinds of stuff. So you had a little walkway with shops and stuff. And then the building is the road is actually running this way. But look at the columns. I mean, that's for the road. You know, column, and a lot of times they had covered. Sometimes they would cover like with cloth, like a tent covering to give you shade as you went down the road. Go ahead.
You want to point out that you can see the little ruts from.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've showed you some pictures of cities in the past that had the ruts still in, but I mean those are wagon wheel ruts from 2,000 years ago. I mean they had so much traffic that it made ruts. Again, just you get to see the columns. Most of the columns fell thanks to a couple of earthquakes between then and now. I mean they weren't destroyed by over time. Earthquakes knocked most of them down. There's treaties between the time they were built and today. They did a lot of damage.
That was the north-south road, by the way.
Yeah, okay.
You can tell by the shadows.
Impressive. So that's, obviously Mary did not take that one, that's an aerial shot, but just kind of to show you, again, picture yourself, a non-Greek, going through the gate, passing the temple of Zeus, going through the marketplace and all the sights and smells and all of that, wow, cool. And then you're walking, this is the main street, and you're walking down a colonnaded street with all of that. I mean, you know that was alluring to them and called to them. Again, the best example I could equate it to today would be like someone from a small little town in backwoods Mississippi, you know, going to New York City
What's happening?
or Alabama. It doesn't matter. Okay, go.
Wow.
That's another temple. Go ahead, because I got the name in a second. Oh, this is, I'm going to show you a close-up shot, but that's the theater. I mean, if you were a Greek city, you had a theater. You might not have as big a one as others, but you had one. Okay. This is the entrance. This is the Artemis temple, and so there would have been a statue to Artemis right there in that little niche.
And Artemis was their big god there.
And this was the patron god of Jerash. So you had the Zeus out front, and then in the center of town, you had a temple to Artemis or Diana. Again, when you were in school, if you liked the Romans better, you know, but again, the Romans basically, when they took over, they took the same gods, same story, just changed the name. So Artemis is Greek and Diana is Roman. I believe that's correct. So this is the main road. So the temple complex started on the road, and then you had to come up this big, huge flights of stairs. I mean, picture a big government building in Washington where you got to go up all these stairs. You know, they're doing that on purpose. They want it up high, and you got to work to get up there.
Or actually, go back to the last bit. Are people actually living in this town now, or is it totally?
Yes.
No, around it, not in the
Yeah.
roots. Yeah, those are Jordanians. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they live all around it. Obviously, it's a Jordanian national park, so you couldn't be inside. You couldn't live inside. So you came up the platform. Then you had a flat area. Kind of, it's the same. It's the same as the Zeus temple. Exact same. You come up a bunch of stairs. You go a flat area, and then you actually go up the stairs into the temple itself. And so that's the temple to Artemis or Diana there in Jerash. And again, just picture Paul and Peter and all the disciples when they go into the cities that we read them about, that we read in the Bible about them going into. That's what they're facing. That's what they're dealing with. That's what they're looking at, and the culture they're having to try and fight. The theater. This is a very well preserved one. That's not the original wood planks there, but everything else is original. They did uncover that was the painting there. They touched it up, I believe, but I mean that was the paint scheme of the theater. Again, all down here you had niches with various gods and figures in it, and in the back as well. And they would perform the play here. And the acoustics are great. I mean, you know, you think about, well, how did they do it? I mean, you can. We set up at the very top, and our leader went down on the stage and talked normal voice. You can hear him perfectly. I mean, they're very smart at the way we tend to think ancient people were. You know, we're so much smarter than they are. I mean, to figure that out, I mean, that's pretty good. So the acoustics are perfectly situated so no matter where you were sitting, you could hear without a microphone or a megaphone, because they want you to hear this Greek worldview they're spouting every night in the plays. Go. Oh man. That's just like a side gate, ruined gate. They're not near. That's not the main one, so we don't have to have a mall that's spectacular. You're supposed to come in the main one, but if you need to leave, if you're on the other end of the city, you would go out to one like that. You see some of the columns.
There's no way to capture how huge they
I
are
know.
standing there.
That picture doesn't do justice to how big they really are. All right, this is just a quote I found from Alexander the Great that I used for my students at school, but then I said I'm going to leave it in because it's appropriate. I can make some connections to us as Christians today, but it gives you a little bit of insight into Alexander, and then there is a life lesson we can learn. I am not afraid of an army of lions led by a sheep. I am afraid of an army of sheep led by a lion. Now let's connect that to us as Christians. You know, without Christ, without God in our life, we think we're the lion, we're all it. We got it together and we go out and we try and do things and we can't do anything because our leader, we don't have one, or whoever we put our trust in is sheep. But as Christians, we're the sheep. How many times does the Bible talk about us being sheep? That's why I like this quote as well, as far as relating it to Christianity. So we're afraid of cats and we're stupid and we do all kinds of bad stuff and we don't know what to do. But our leader is a lion. It's God Almighty, and He knows and He's in control of everything. And so, Alexander would say, I would much rather deal with a bunch of individuals that were strong but didn't have a good leader than to deal with people that were weak but that had a strong leader. And as Christians, that's what we are. We are weak, but we have the strongest leader that there is out there in the Lord God Almighty. And so, I just think that's I thought the quote was very appropriate to us as Christians today. So we need to make sure we're the sheep. Don't try and be the lion on our own. Be the sheep and let God be our leader, and let's go kick some butt. Can I say kick some butt in class? I think I can. Let's go kick some world butt there. Get rid of that. We don't call it Hellenism anymore, but get rid of the modern day Hellenism. Questions or thoughts about that? Okay. I'm going to draw to a close here in a second because I'm getting to a point where I'm fixing to launch into a whole other area. But the Persian Empire is destroyed by Alexander, and the power shifts from east to west. And again, instead of going, okay, great, that is a huge thing that occurs. Basically, think about power shifting from Iran to the United States. I mean, that's what just happened. Okay. The Middle Eastern, the Persian Empire was the dominant empire of the world. Alexander makes it the European. The Europeans are become the dominant and stay that way the rest of history, at least to this point. It is interesting that it's the descendants of the Iranians that are the ones that are in charge, and Alexander takes over, and then all the trouble we're having with Iran today. I mean, because sometimes people go, "Oh, Iran, they're never going to do anything."
Well, and so obviously they didn't completely wipe them out.
No.
They just kind of pushed them back down into the
Well, they defeated the king and took over. Obviously, the people still there. Just like when you take over an area, you still got to have the people do the work and stuff like that. So, yeah, the modern descendants of Iraq and Iran and that part of the world today would go back to the Persians.
Okay. And then by the time the Crusades came, hundreds of years later.
Totally different.
Yeah.
That's like Turks from a little bit
Oh,
further
they're
on
on the first. Okay.
come in. But some of the same people then are going to fight, because then that part of the world, at this point, there's no such thing as Islam. Of the big three, Islam is the newest. It's Judaism and then Christianity, and then Islam is way later.
Like 950.
Yeah, way later. Which a lot of people don't realize that, or they try to make it out like it's not. It's way later. And so, no, when the Turks move in and conquer the same area, they convert by force mostly to people of Islam. That's a never mind. Go. There's so much interconnectedness. I can't get into it all. We'd never leave. Alexander does die in 323 again, perhaps poisoned, perhaps just dies, and that's a mosaic of him. Who knows if that's how he really looked, but that's one of the oldest images of him. And then his kingdom, he dies so young, he doesn't have an heir. His kingdom is split among his 5 generals. And that's where we're going to get into next Sunday, is these generals, and again, go all of them. But it's very important, these 5 generals. 2 of them in particular, we're not going to learn all 5.
One was Ptolemy, wasn't
2 of them are of interest to us and affect the Holy Land, because these 2 fight and all. Let's look at the map. Unless anybody's still writing. Anybody still writing? Need that? Do I need to go back?
It's
Okay.
kind of interesting that the Old Testament is written when the East was prevalent.
Yep.
And in the New Testament, still the Jews and like Jesus and the disciples, they were all Eastern thinking people, but the West is now prevalent. It's just, I never thought about that God, you know,
Yeah.
that we have
Totally
scriptures
reset
for both.
everything. Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
All right. One thing we were talking about last week that the Bible was written in Greek, but the Romans are in charge, and you said you would address it this week.
Well, because basically basically you just swap the name. It's the same culture, same everything, same language. I mean, it's Latin, but it's Greek, and it's basically the same. It's kind of like, what would it be like today? Like Spanish speaking in Spain versus in Guatemala. Slight differences, but it's basically the same. The Romans basically they are Greeks. They're just this far over. That's the tip of Rome, and then Alexander and the Greeks are this. The Romans, they're right there. And they use the same religion, they use the same everything. So I'm not a linguist, so I don't know the exact, because I know you can take Greek and you can take Latin. But they're
he?
very
It's not the
close.
same branch, but it's fairly similar.
Very similar, yeah. So it was an easy conversion. When the Romans take over, it's a very conversion to go from I'm speaking Greek to now I'm speaking Latin. But yeah, the Septuagint, which will be what we're going to talk about pretty early on next week, is this guy right here commissions the Greek for translation of the Old Testament, which again is a big part of the lesson next week. So why is this important? Stopping here, but look at the map. So Alexander's empire split among it. He had no son, no heir, so his generals split it up. Now, how long do you think they were happy with their split?
5 minutes.
About 5 minutes, and then they start fighting. So
Some of them not real happy.
these 3 are going to get into conflict, and this guy's going to go away, and then these 2 are going to be the 2 that interest us as far as Christianity and Judaism and what happens to the Jews. These 2 guys right here and their descendants are the ones that are going to have a huge impact on the world that Jesus inherits. And I don't want to say much more because
Well, where do we, because I recognize the last kingdom stuff.
these 2
I see
are the ones that those names you might recognize.
but out of the Bible though. Have I not seen a reference to that in scripture somewhere?
I don't
No.
think so. Maybe okay. They name a bunch of, just like Alexander named Alexandria for himself.
Mhm.
They name a bunch of places. Maybe that's it. I can't think of a city but these are the generals' names. And again, we'll be looking at them next week.